Hi, my name is Stuart Lynch, and this is the first in a series of 3 videos where I'm going to show you how to add photos using a photos picker or choose and use a camera to take photos and then persist those photos to a SwiftData data store. After completing this series, you'll be able to use those views and the techniques learned to add photos and camera access to any one of your applications. And as a bonus, you'll learn how you can zoom and pan on your images. I love getting your feedback, so tap the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video and leave a comment below. Make sure you subscribe to the video and ring that bell to get notifications of new videos. And if you want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. Here's a demonstration of what the completed code will look like. It isn't a robust app. It just allows you to pick photos from the Photos album or use your camera to take photos and save those photos as data properties in a SwiftData data store. Here's an example of where I create a new object and I can select an image from my iPhone Photos library. The demo SwiftData model only has a name and a data property, but your models might have many more, plus other relationships. When you choose to use the camera for the first time, you'll be asked to grant that permission. Once granted, you have full use of both your front and back cameras to take photos and save the completed one to your database. As a bonus, in the last video of the series, I'll show you a simple solution for zooming and panning your images. The solution we developed gives you the ability to update and replace the images, or even clear them out. If for some reason you denied access to your Photos album, or you disable that permission like I'm showing you here by going to the Settings, Privacy and Security, and then Camera, and then turning off the permission for this app, I'll be showing you how to present the error and instructions to your users should they want to take a photo with the camera and that permission has been denied. This is what we're going to be learning in this 3-part series. The objective here is to build a simple solutions that you can reuse in any one of your projects that are using SwiftData and include the ability to store an image as one of the data model properties. That image can be obtained either by taking a photo with the camera or by picking an existing photo using the Photos album. Now, I've decided to break this up into 3 videos. In the first one, we'll cover developing the UI and creating our data model. The second will add the ability to pick and update photos using the new PhotosUI framework, which is available for SwiftUI. But in the third video, we have to resort to UIKit, as there's no simple SwiftUI version like the PhotosUI framework yet for accessing and using the camera. Since I'm breaking this out into different video, should Apple update and add a SwiftUI camera framework in the future, I can easily replace that video while still keeping the first 2 intact. Let's start then by creating a new Swift project. Then Xcode, create a new Swift project and name the project Camera Photo SwiftData. I'm also going to rename our content view to PhotosListView, as we're going to be displaying a list of all of the photos that we'll have captured either with the camera or chosen from our Photos album. And now we're going to start by creating our sample model that we'll use to store our photos in SwiftData. So create a new Swift file and call it sample model. It's going to represent the model in your database that may have several properties, but one of them is going to be an optional data property that will contain the data for an image. So first we'll import SwiftData. We'll create the class called SampleModel, and we'll decorate it with the @model macro for SwiftData. So we'll create a name property that's a string, and then we'll create that data property that will be the optional data type. Now, I want Xcode to decide if the data will be stored locally or within the data structure itself. So we'll decorate that property with an attribute specifying external storage. Now we'll need to create an initializer, and we'll just let Xcode generate that for us. That's fine. The default will be that the data is nil, so no photo chosen initially. Now, when we do have that data, we'd like to convert it to an image that we'll be able to use in our UI. And if not, we'll want to create a placeholder image. So let's create a computed property called image that will be an optional UI image. Then I can use an if-let to unwrap the data if it exists and return the UI image formed from that data. Otherwise, I'm going to return nil and I'll have to do something else. Now, of course, UI image isn't known to Foundation, so I'll need to change my import to UIKit. If the image does not exist, as I said, we'll want to display some placeholder image whenever we want to display that image in our view. So I'm going to create a new folder group, and I'm going to call it imagepicker_camera. This is where I'm going to place all my code. And inside there, I'm going to create a new Swift file, and I'm just going to call it constants. I'm going to change the import to UIKit instead of Foundation. Then I'm going to create an enum called constants. It's just going to act basically as a namespace. So inside there, I can create a static property called placeholder and assign to it a UI image using the system name photo.fill. So we'll return to our sample model now. I'm going to create an extension, and that's going to allow us to create an array of sample items that we can use for our previews. These items will not have any images, just a name property set so that we can see how we can add or change images after the item has been created. So we'll create an extension for sample model, and we'll create a static property named preview that is a model container, and we'll decorate it as a main actor. Within the closure, we'll create a container using letContainer as a result of trying to create a model container for SampleModel.self, but we'll specify configurations as a model configurations type with is stored in memory only set to true. And then I can create computed sample array of sample model, and I'll just create 3 samples with different names like sample 1, sample 2, and sample 3. Next, I can iterate through these samples with a for each loop, inserting each one into the container using the main context. And then I can just return the container. Since we're using SwiftData, we can then return to the app starting point where app main is. We'll import SwiftData, and then I'll attach a model container for the SampleModel.self, and that will inject it into the environment on our Windows group, where we can then have access to it in our views. So let's work on that PhotosListView right now. First, let's import SwiftData, and then we can attach a model container to the preview in our PhotosListView, where the model container is our SampleModel.preview object. This means our preview will have access to that array. So we can perform a query with a sort on the SampleModel.name key path and assign the array of sample models received to a variable called samples. Now that we have that, we can build our UI. So let's replace the body content with a navigation stack. Within the navigation stack, I'm going to add a group. And within that group, I'm going to use an if statement to check to see if samples is empty. If it is empty, we'll create a content unavailable view, and we'll provide the string add your first photo as the title, and use a system image of photo. That way, if no photos have been added yet, it'll show this content unavailable view. Then we'll create an else statement, and for now I'm just going to add a comment here that we'll put photos list in shortly. I'll add a navigation title of picker or camera. And then I'm going to create a toolbar. And there's going to be a single item on the toolbar, so we can just create a button. And we'll leave the action empty for now. But for the label, we'll create an image using the system name of plus.circle.fill. Now notice that no toolbar or navigation title is being displayed. And we're going to fix that now by displaying our photos list. Nothing's being displayed because we have returned a query and we're not displaying any of the items in that query. So we're going to replace that comment now with a list that will iterate through the samples array to provide you with a sample iterator. So in the closure, create a navigation link with value and label, and for the value, we'll specify the sample. For the closure label then, we'll create an H-stack, and we're going to want to display a small version of the image that we will have if it exists, or our placeholder image. So I'm going to create an image view using the UI image constructor, and then I'll use a ternary operator to check to see if sample.image is nil. If so, I'll display the constant's placeholder image. And if not, then I can safely display the sample image computed property and unwrap it. I'm going to make it resizable, scale to fill. I'll specify a frame with a width and height both being 50. I'll apply a corner radius of 12 and make it clipped. And then add some trailing padding. Next to that, in the H-stack, I'm going to create a text view displaying the sample name with a font of title. And then I'll change the list style to be plain. Next, we can set up the navigation by creating a navigation destination for our SampleModel.self type to get the tapped sample in the list. And then we're going to use this to display a larger view of the image and name properties. And since this is also a trailing closure, we can move that closing parentheses over and remove the label. Well, for completeness sake, I want to be able to delete any images. So I'm going to add a swipe gesture. So delete the SwiftData will access the context. So we'll need to have an environment property for that. So create the environment with the model context key path and assign that to a property that we'll just call model context. And then we can attach to the navigation link that swipe action. Inside there, we'll create a button with a role of destructive. That's going to make the button red. And for the label, we'll use a system image of trash. For the action then, we'll use the model context.delete action on that sample. And then to be sure it gets updated immediately, I like to call the model context save function using an optional try. Well, you can test this out in the preview right now. We can use the swipe action to delete one or two or all of those items in the list. Once all three are removed, we see our content unavailable view. And you can reset this list by simply toggling the preview on and off. Well, our navigation link has to take us somewhere. So I'm going to create a view for that, where we can use that to display the name and a larger image and the name in a view all by itself. So I'm going to create a new SwiftUI file, and I'm going to call it SampleView. Now we're going to be passing in an image from the list, so I'm going to create a let property called sample that is of type SampleModel. And since we want to see what we're doing in the preview, we'll need to get access to one of our samples from our preview container. So this means that we'll first need to import SwiftData. Then in the preview macro, we'll create an instance of our static preview container. Then we can create a fetch descriptor that'll fetch all of the samples from the sample model. Then we can get the array by trying to execute the container's main context's fetch function, passing in that fetch descriptor. And since we know we have 3 of them, we can specify either item 0, 1, or 2 as the one that we want to display and assign to a sample property. And then we can simply return the sample view with that sample. And since we're within a navigation stack, I want to wrap the preview in one so that we can see any toolbars or titles that we may add. So with that in place, then we can replace the content of our body with a VStack and add some padding. As the first item in the VStack, I'm going to create a text view and display sample.name and specify a font with a large title. Now we're going to do the same check that we did in the list view to see if the sample image is nil, and if so, display the placeholder. Otherwise, we'll display the unwrapped sample image. We'll make it resizable. This time, though, we'll scale to fit. I'm going to set a corner radius of 12, but now I see that this is going to be deprecated, so I should be using a clip shape instead. So let's do that then. We'll use a clip shape with a rounded rectangle with a corner radius of 12. And then add some padding. So that means then we should probably go back to our photos list view and fix that clipped that we used there. So let's go back there. I'll replace the corner radius and clipped with a clip shape using the same rounded rectangle with a corner radius of 12. Back in our sample view then, below this image, still within the VStack, we'll create an HStack with 2 buttons. One for edit, and we'll leave the action empty for now. And the second will be delete with a role of destructive. And then I'm going to apply a button style of bordered prominent to the entire HStack. And then to push the HStack to the right of the parent container within the VStack, then I'll set a frame specifying a max width of infinity and an alignment of trailing. And then finally, to push this content up to the top, I'll add a spacer in the VStack. Well, we can actually code the delete action right now, but we'll need access to the model context. So let's create an environment variable for the model context key path and assign it to a variable called model context. And then since we'll be deleting the image, we'll dismiss the view on the stack, so create another environment property called dismiss using the dismiss key path. Then within the action for the delete button, we can use the model context to delete the sample. And then we can use the optional try to call the model context save function, and then call the dismiss function. So let's add a navigation title using the string SampleView, and then set the navigation bar title mode to inline. So we can finally then return to our list view now, and then for the navigation destination closer, we'll present this sample view passing in the sample. We can test this now, and we see that we can present the view, and we can delete one of the items and return to the list view when it's deleted. So that completes the setup in this first video of this 3-part series. If you found it useful, please give the video a thumbs up and leave me a comment. Consider subscribing to my channel and enable notifications so you're notified when I release new videos. In the next video in this series, and you'll find that in the playlist, we'll jump right in to accessing photos and using them from our photo album.